Welcome. We are live. It is Fridays in Fintech, and I am your host, Jake Pimental, and we have a very exciting guest, Evan Sopenoff. Did I say that correct?
Yes, you did.
Oh, awesome, awesome. And really, this episode will be diving into AI, working with regulators, also how institutions think about cybersecurity and vendor procurement, and a little bit about Evan. Evan has spent over 15 years in fraud and compliance. First started in different analyst roles, compliance roles at BNY Mellon, then went to lead compliance testing and monitoring at Moody's, and then went on to S&P where he focused on compliance and digital communications, and he increased productivity by 40%, also decreased vendor costs by $3 million, and also human capital costs by $200 million over about 5 to 6 years. He also spent time as VP of compliance at Exos, where he supported a $100 million credit trading system and ATS, oversaw their firm's policies and procedures. And Evan is currently Senior Vice President at Capital Markets, the Capital Markets Regular Engagement at Citi. Welcome, Evan. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I always like to ask the hard questions starting out. And do you prefer pineapple on your pizza?
Oh, wow, it's a controversial question.
Especially being in New Jersey, right?
Full disclosure, I've lived in New Jersey my whole life, and worked in Manhattan, so pizza's a pretty big topic. And I happen to be a traditionalist, so I go no pineapple on my pizza.
No pineapple, but do you like it though?
I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. But if you ask me,
yeah, you're like, no way.
I'd like to order it. It's not something I would ever order.
Yeah, you just don't do that.
Yeah. No, that's a sin around here.
Yeah, it is. That's funny. I was talking to a couple other New Yorkers. So I secretly like Domino's. I'm like, no way. All right.
Listen, those things are always going to have their place. They're not bad. They're just not traditional pizza.
Yeah, for sure. Well, going back to kind of compliance and risk, and really, your journey is pretty incredible. I love kind of seeing what you're doing now, what you've done in the past. What really led you down this path, and what led you to where you are today? Like, what was your interest, and what was that journey like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually lived a different life. I was in a different world. I started my career in government contracting. I always thought I wanted to be, work for the Department of Defense or be some sort of intelligence analyst and go overseas and things like that. And then I met my wife, and that changed.
Usually it does, right?
That's usually a contributing factor, right? And that all changed. But I've always had a personal, fascination with finance and technology. And at the time, I was in a different life, or in a different industry. It was sort of just post Dodd-Frank, right? It was post financial crisis, post Dodd-Frank, and there were a lot of opportunities in the financial services sector that aligned with what I was doing, and I felt that there were, synergies, and that not only my personal interest but my skill set lended well, and there was alignment to that. So I broke into compliance because there was a lot of investigations components to compliance that I've always liked. I've always been a curious individual, and I hit the ground running with that, and it's sort of been my path ever since.
Yeah, very cool. Did anything surprise you as you got more experience, became more senior in these different roles?
Did anything surprise me?
That you just didn't realize, or was kind of like, no way, that's how that works?
No, I can't. I don't know if I'd say that I use the term surprised, but you definitely get caught off guard here and there. I think there are events that happen in the market that impact firms and institutions across all industries, but and those are the things that I actually find fun: the crisis management situations, the bespoke events, impacting a variety of different things across banks or broker dealers, whatever it may be. For example, you've got escalations across the world. You've got the Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine escalation that impacts a lot of firms and their assets that they have in those countries, right? So there are a lot of people that have tied up assets that can't get them out based off of sanctioned countries and entities. And So to go back to your question, I don't know if things surprise me, but they certainly keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I was at this event yesterday, and it was about the SVP, and
Yeah.
kind of it's so funny. It's like, I mean, you worked at large institutions and some of the best in the world, right? How do they think about it? What's that? Is there a war room? Is there kind of like, hey guys, like all hands on deck? How did large institutions think about that and that risk?
No question. There's not a war room, so to speak, but you certainly have, when you have select business activities, whether it's the SVB crisis or any other, risk-related matter that impacts you, at that scale, you certainly have committees, you have charters, you have governance forums and things of that nature. So you're gathering all those folks that are already structured into that framework, right? So you've got
Mm,
your verticals in terms of risk, compliance, legal, whatever it may be. And it is certainly all hands on deck. It is
yeah,
certainly all hands on deck because you're trying to understand the depths of, how far a particular matter goes. And you have to understand root causes and the depths of those risks before you can actually come up with an action plan to move forward.
yeah. Any interesting like stories you can share on that, or
Yeah, I mean, nothing,
yeah,
particular to
yeah,
any
yeah,
one
yeah,
firm, right? But like,
yeah,
listen, you
yeah.
learn a lot about people in those situations, how people operate, who can stay
Mm,
calm under pressure, who produces in those scenarios, those heightened,
mm,
pressure scenarios, what works, what doesn't work from a policy or procedure perspective. Lessons learned as you move forward through event to event, because none of them are one of the same, right? So there
mm,
are lessons learned associated to each one of these, stress events that are,
mm-hmm.
triggered by, external factors. Um, and, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know until it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's really kind of over preparing, like, hey, we have these policies in place. Let's really be proactive with it as it
Yeah.
happens as well, and
Yeah.
kind of plan for this in the future. And, as things come, just making sure that, all right, we're good. We've tried to
No
find
question.
everything we could. Yeah.
I think primarily, a lot of these stress events you can fit in a box, right? And you, and,
Mm,
and and things, some of them, most of them are a little bit more black and white than others. But, look what happened with COVID. Look what
yeah.
happened with a lot of these events. Like you just cannot predict for something. You can't predict for things like that, and it impacts, everything from the ground floor to the ceiling, not just
Mm,
financial services, right? So you've got,
mm,
and so, I guess my point being is you can't prepare for everything. You prepare as best as you possibly can based off of the historical context that you have,
mm-hmm.
right? And as you move
Yeah.
forward and you learn through these, other matters when they occur, um, then you're a little bit more prepared moving forward.
Got it. Yeah, it's one of those things, right, where in financial advisory, hey, past performance doesn't indicate future performance and all that fun stuff, all those fun disclosures. And as
Right.
much as you can say, like, hey, on average, the stock market will return 7% over the next 15, 20 years. It's doesn't mean it will actually happen, right?
Right. No, right. Now,
Yeah.
listen, I think, and it kind of goes back to what you and I were saying before about, dependencies and people who, the firms that, the third parties that you use and,
Hmm.
other platforms and operational outages and events that occur that make you reevaluate, your relationships and the people that you do business with, not from, just a relationship perspective, but,
Mm.
operationally, how these things impact your businesses and the level of impact that an outage or some sort of stress event could have on your system.
Yeah. Yeah, diving a little deeper into that, kind of the cybersecurity aspect and also the vendor diligent aspect. I saw you've saved a ton of money, also helped increase productivity. What is that process like for finding a great partner, doing the right diligence on them, and then making sure that your systems are okay to work with it?
It's a good question, and it's a process. It's a process. It's not an overnight thing. It's a bunch of conversations. It's intellectual capacity. It's operational capacity. It's
Hmm.
technological capacity, and how that fits your business. Some things fit for purpose, and some things don't.
Hmm.
And that'll vary from relationship to relationship and third party to third party. Things are very, very interesting. I mean, for example, there are things going on in the world right now that impact people, whether that, and um, third-party platforms and cybersecurity matters. For instance, there were privacy laws and cybersecurity laws that were passed within China and Hong Kong. And for international institutions, these are things that they have to address. Where the state felt that they passed these laws that they felt they were entitled to entities who operate within their jurisdiction, that they're entitled to certain data. And for financial institutions, that can be PII, client information, bank information, inside information in terms of material non-public information. And you have to be thoughtful about how systems are designed, the security around those systems, controls around those systems, who has access to those systems, so access entitlements. And then, legal will get involved in terms of whether they actually will release information like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And that's just one particular instance. So there's a lot of focus on China right now from a privacy perspective, just given their form of government and the laws that they have and whether you operate or intend to operate within those jurisdictions. There are nuances to each and every country, as most people who have been involved in multinational organizations know.
That's super fascinating. It's kind of like these governments like, hey, you guys have to do this. And really, it's like, as an institution, right, we need to protect our clients. We need to protect who we're working with. And so you have to work with these regulators, be like, hey, guys, like, is there a middle ground, or let's set up this other system, and then they're fighting for this.
And you have to know, you have to understand servers and server security and location. You could have U.S. information that's housed on a server internationally, or vice versa, international information that's housed domestically. It's based off of most companies now work off cloud platforms. So you've got single sign-on. You can remote into your desktop anywhere in the world. You don't just sit at your single your computer anymore. So that has implications and consequences in terms of how things are set up and configured.
Wow.
So really think about how people can access that information, who can access that information, and you need to monitor all these things.
Yeah, how it's partitioned as well, the infrastructure, all that stuff, which is kind of funny. You're leading compliance, and it's like you have to know all this IT, this cybersecurity stuff as well, and how it's partitioned and within the cloud.
I think in legal compliance, you certainly have folks, or a segment of folks, that have their specialties. I historically have always been more of a technology SME. I started as an examiner, so I needed to know how systems work, and I needed to know from the ground floor up to the front end visualization from an end user perspective. So back end infrastructure and development and data into the front end of things, and how that soup to nuts works. So I think that experience not only was extremely beneficial to me, but I just have a personal interest in it as well. And the world is all about technology.
You're an engineer as well?
I wish.
I mean, I didn't see that on your list.
I wish. I'd probably get paid a lot more money.
Yeah. But I know it's kind of, I bet you're dangerous enough, right? That's
dangerous enough is a good way to put it.
Yeah. That's super fascinating. And kind of talking about technologies and these new things happening. Are you seeing any interesting use cases with AI, ML within that infrastructure, or working with these regulators and protecting this data, as well as getting insights out of the data?
Yeah, no question. I'll say this, generally speaking, across the industry, there's a lot of information out there on the news, or publications that are released in the public domain. AI is a hot topic. Machine learning is a hot topic. Machine learning is not something that's new. It's been going on for 20 years. Generative AI is what is new, and trying to grasp what that means for society, what that means for business, use cases, and optimization opportunities. And I think, while we're in our infancy, it's certainly a focus area of select regulators. Or I shouldn't say select, I should say all regulatory regimes, but that is relevant to select legal entities. And I say that, and let me just kind of explain what I mean by that. There are prudential regulators that are centralized authorities in terms of preserving the integrity of our banking system, our banks and financial system. And that's, the Fed, the OCC, the FDIC, CFPB, those entities. And then there are capital markets regulators.
Yep.
Right. So you've got SEC, FINRA, CFTC, NFA that are, that's, prudential is safety and soundness of your bank, of the financial system. Capital markets is a rule-based regulatory system. Right. So that's market integrity. So think institutional and retail. So there's and there's different requirements for all that stuff and all the legal vehicles that are involved in those business activities. But when I say that, I would say, the technology, the maturation of, firms' programs and where these technological advancements are at its infancy, right? People are just trying to grasp what they can do, how they can do it, and what that, means from an optimization perspective and cost. But, primarily it started as, process optimization. And now you're talking about, client demand and use cases in terms of, certain business activities, trading in markets, wholesale and credit loans, lending platforms, right? So a lot of different use cases. But I think a lot of what I see in the news is a little bit inflated in terms of where we are in society.
Yeah, or where the true value is, where the true ROI is, having really great enterprise case studies.
Right.
I think we're starting to get there, but it still is you need the right experts with the right LLMs and the right people to validate the Gen AI LLMs, right? And I think that's where we're going. But I loved your point about and I guess I've never really thought about it. I mean, it's funny when you have a unique insight, it's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense about the different regulators, the different, prudential regulators and kind of the capital markets and how you think about the integrity of the bank versus institutional and retail. I love that, by the way.
It's a whole set of different requirements. It's a whole different ball game. And, the functionality of your roles and responsibilities are completely different based off of where you sit.
Yeah. And who you're working with and really which regulator you're working with and what their goal is. Super fascinating stuff. Yeah.
No, and I facilitate engagements on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis about AI and machine learning, closely plugged into what we have at Citi, which is called the Center of Excellence. And I'll just generally speaking. And, I guess my point is that, I think people are really starting to try to understand what your ROI is. And they're dedicating and allocating resources to this technology. I think everyone wants to, decrease operating costs and increase profit, right? That's consistent across the board. That's whether you work for a bank or whether you work for, like a marketing firm, it doesn't matter. That's how business works. So
exactly. Is that exactly? We're a startup, but really the core theory is, right, businesses want to save costs and make more money. And then the new products you build, it's like, these are our hypotheses, right? This is our hypothesis how can we affect this theory of making more money or saving more costs, right? And so depending on what products you lean into for this company in B2B SaaS, that's kind of how you think about it, have to think about it, right? Like, how much ROI are we really delivering for this product or this product or this product?
And you also have to think about risk, right? So which plays a huge factor into it. So I have this technology, right? You plug in a bunch of, underlying methodologies and data, and you spit out an output. But what does that mean? What does that do for you, right? And what level of human intervention do you have once you receive that output? And these are things that regulators think about, specifically when you talk about retail, on the retail side. Capital markets regulators, SEC, FINRA, right? So you talk about the investment advisor space, right? Is it spitting out recommendations in terms of investment advice? And if it is there a human component on the other end of it to say, all right, maybe this is accurate, or maybe we should pivot, or maybe we should do this or that? You're not there's no guardrails. and you got to make sure that there's guardrails and governance around these technologies and matters. So, um, it's all thought of very, very differently from whether you sit on the bank side or whether you sit on the retail side.
Yeah. Do you see in it kind of being like a more like cybersecurity with Gen AI? It's like, hey, we've set up these tools. Here are our guardrails. Here are our frameworks. Now we have to educate regulators or other team members about the security measure or the measures in place. I guess they wouldn't be so much security,
Right.
but our AI guardrail measures in place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no question. That's exactly what's happening, and that's what regulators want to know, right?
Yeah.
There's always a process at any firm you work in for new products, right? So there's a forum or a governance structure around new products. You don't just
Hmm.
approve something and then deploy it, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
thought, there's some thought around these things, right? And they want to know, whether it's AI or whether it's it doesn't matter what it is. They want to know what your structure is, what your frameworks are, what your standards are, and
Mm.
how that flows upstream to whether that's governance committees or boards. And then also, in addition to that, how boards are digesting the information and risk and what flows back
Interesting.
downstream in terms of their governance and directionality.
Wow. That's super fascinating. And it's kind of like, you know, have you seen I don't know, what's a great example? Can you share any great examples of that, or just like what that ideal process is like, right? Where it's like, hey, we've identified this solution. This is great. This is the information that's easily digestible. Here's the RI, but here's all the risk.
There's no question. So each, just from a general
Yeah,
process,
general. Yeah, yeah.
you've got multiple functions that are plugged into some sort of new process approval. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It doesn't
Yep.
matter whether it's AI or anything else. It doesn't matter what firm you work for. That's just
Hmm.
sort of like the general framework. So you've got a proposed process or a proposed product where someone wants to launch something new. You've
Hmm.
got, risk, compliance, legal, so first line, second line, third line representation, and then audit, from a third line will validate, whether it goes to whether they validate prior to the board or, maybe the board has some questions for audit, once it gets to them. But those are the guardrails. That's the framework. It flows upstream, right? You start at the ground. You have this idea. Ideas are flushed out by, things, new ideas are flushed out before it gets to the board based off of obviously money's involved, right? So, what's your target audience? What segment is it going to sit in? What businesses is it applied to? What legal entities are you going to issue that new product out of? All these things are considered and wrapped up into, let's just call it a package before it flows upstream for approval. And by the time it gets to the board, it's pretty concrete. Or by the time it gets to some sort of governance approval or committee approval. Um, but there's certainly a lot of people and a lot of functions and folks involved in these things.
Especially if it's a larger institution or a larger company.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Like
like,
at a
hey,
startup like yours, right? We've both been in the
yeah,
startup world.
yep,
You
yep,
might
yep,
sit in a room with 10 people, right? And, these 10 people are consequential in terms of the directionality and the profitability of the company.
yep,
At larger institutions, you have many more companies, many more functions, many more processes. So,
yep,
sort of same thing, larger scale.
yep. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, you're in capital markets, so I feel like we have to talk about digital assets and
Yeah.
kind of the market going into that. And, it is pretty interesting, right? Like back in, I guess we're in a bull market again. I mean, you could
Yeah.
call it that, right? All
Seems that
time
way.
high. Seems like it, right? I spent a lot of time in crypto and DeFi.
Yeah.
And, it seems like, with the Bitcoin ETFs, a lot of stuff happening on that front. How is the market looking at it, right? How are regulators looking at it? How are larger institutions like, all right, guys, this is becoming a real thing.
Yeah.
Is this like equatable to gold as an asset? Like, eh.
Well,
But
I think that
yeah,
remains to be seen, right? I don't think
yeah,
we're there. I
yeah,
don't think we're there yet, right? I think the way large institutions look at it, and I'm not representing any one particular
yep,
institution, but
yep,
it's by client demand.
uh,
It's pretty simple.
yep,
Is there a client demand, and how do we action that? If there's not, you're not gonna allocate resources, heavy resources towards that particular activity. if there
Hmm.
is, like you see now, and I think a lot of it sparked by, regulatory approval, which is something that has been pivotal in the crypto space, and that has not happened, in previous years until now, right? So I think what you're seeing now is asset managers want to get involved. The primary use cases that I observe, and I just have a personal interest in this stuff, let alone being at a large institution, you've
Mm.
got tokenization and custody services.
Mm.
Those are the largest use cases. So
Mm.
choosing how to deploy tokenization and what that means for client demand,
Mm.
as well as custody, right? Because you saw what happened with Coinbase and other crypto exchanges, Binance, whatever it may be, that essentially went belly up a few years ago.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And what
Exactly.
happens to people's money that's sitting on that exchange that don't have secondary custody services?
Pretty much you get
Gone,
like
gone,
gone
gone.
or 1 cent on the dollar, right?
Right. Right. Now that's the risk in decentralization.
Mm.
But I'll say this, and this is just my own personal opinion on things. One, client demand is very high. People want to, people are struggling with, inflationary pressure, prices of everything,
Yep.
the market, whatever it may be. So people always want an alternative, always, no matter, what era you live in.
Hmm.
There's always something new, right? This is sort of our .com boom,
Yeah.
sort of how I look at it. But the regulatory approval, and let's just take BlackRock for instance. A firm like BlackRock doesn't go out on a limb and issue an ETF if there's no client.
Mm.
Regulatory approval doesn't happen unless there is client demand and some sort of external pressure from a regulatory perspective, right? So pressure towards regulators to approve these things. And that's sort of my take on
That's
where we sit.
that's super fascinating. It's all comes down to client demand, and
Yeah, I mean
you know,
BlackRock
yeah.
owns pretty much 60-70% of all assets on the planet.
Wow,
So it's a massive, massive company, right?
that's
So
crazy.
they're not just going out on a limb and saying, let's take a stab at this ETF and see what happens.
Yep.
There's data behind that.
There's like they're not just like this is a cool technology. I think this will change the future. It's like, hey,
No,
clients want this exposure to this type of asset.
no
Let's
question.
enable it, and then
No
the
question. And I
regulators.
think it's
Yeah.
also a safer vehicle,
Oh yeah.
right? So if your assets are in a FDIC insured bank versus on a crypto exchange for a retail investor, there's a big difference. There's a
It's
big difference. And that
it's
goes
it's
back to the
yeah.
prudential safety and soundness aspect of bank integrity, financial system integrity.
It's super fascinating. I have a lot of friends who are very much into the DeFi world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hey, decentralization. It's like, hey guys, like it's. Have you seen how many rugs happened? How many hacks happened? How many all this stuff? It's like let's
There's certainly pros and
yeah,
cons. There are
yeah,
certainly pros and cons. I
exactly.
think this is just my listen. I'm speaking. I'm representing myself in terms of some
Yep.
of these viewpoints, but um, think about how many counterparties are involved in the transaction, settlement services, custody services, and think about that. What that does to the cost of your operating costs,
Yep.
and think
Yep.
about blockchain technology when you make a transaction within what, a minute, 30 seconds. You've got a full audit trail of a singular transaction, and you've cut out how many counterparties that charge how many excess and millions of dollars of fees. Think
Yep.
about cross-border payments, rates businesses. Think about what it does to those businesses. Like if I'm in Australia and I need to send some money back to California, and what that does from a digital asset perspective versus currency, centralized currency.
Yep.
There are
It's
differences. There are huge
yep.
differences.
Oh yeah. It's kind of funny. We're coming up on time, unfortunately,
No
but
worries.
it's really the circle and kind of what they've done in their ecosystem, right? There's whole businesses just built with like, hey, I have a Circle account, you have a Circle account. Let's both, we're MSBs.
Right.
We're going to transfer, USDC as really our ledger between us, and then paying out in local currencies. It's pretty interesting, and there's a lot more stuff happening in that space, and it's super
There is.
fascinating.
And businesses
Yeah.
are targeting those opportunities
Yep.
because those are the use cases that I think bring value to not only the client but to the market. Right. And they'll exhaust those. Something that can be decentralized can easily be centralized.
Yep. That's it.
It's a matter of it's a matter of somebody making a decision.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Well, Evan, this was great. I wish we could go on and talk more about it.
Sure.
But unfortunately, it's coming to an end. And really, we love closed loop systems, no KYC. And so we have a special little thing for you. We got a random gift card to a Midwestern restaurant. And today's Midwestern restaurant is going to be Chili's. I don't know if you got.
I do actually.
Is there one in New
Who doesn't like
Jersey?
to get Chili's?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of one of those things where it's just funny. It's like, hey, no KYC required. But
Super funny. Super funny.
yeah,
Listen,
Evan.
Joe, I always enjoy our conversations, and
Yeah,
the more we have, the more intrigued I am in terms of continuing our discussions and relationship. And happy to talk anytime.